American Picker star Danielle Colby is bringing her unique passion of burlesque to the Quad Cities.
Her museum dedicated to the genre will open tomorrow in Davenport.
American Pickers was supposed to be about rusty bikes, forgotten treasures. Instead, one of its biggest mysteries became the disappearance of the woman who helped build the show from day one. Danielle Colby wasn't just the office manager. She was the face fans trusted, the voice that kept everything moving, and one of the reasons millions tuned in every week. Then, suddenly, something changed. Her appearances became fewer. Rumors started flying. Was she fired? Did she quit? Was there a secret feud nobody was talking about? Some fans even believed she had been pushed out behind the scenes. But the real story is far more shocking. It is 5 things happening all at once, and none of them is what most people think. Who Danielle really was before the show. Most people only know Danielle Colby as the woman behind the desk at Antique Archaeology. But that image misses about 90% of who she actually is. Before American Pickers ever existed, Danielle was running her own burlesque troupe out of Illinois and Iowa. She performed under the stage name Danny Diesel. She organized shows, trained performers, and built a small but loyal fan base, doing something completely different from anything on the History Channel. Burlesque is an art form rooted in theatrics, costume, and storytelling through performance. That world was Danielle's first, before antiques ever were. Mike Wolfe and Danielle had actually been friends for about a decade before the show started. Their first meeting happened at a yard sale and reportedly did not go smoothly at all. But something clicked over time. When Mike eventually got the green light from the History Channel, he already knew who he wanted to fill that office role. He wanted someone who broke the mold. He specifically did not want the show to look like a typical antique store. No blue blazers, no 10 cats on the counter. He wanted edge, personality, and a look that would make people pay attention. Danielle fit all of that. She was covered in tattoos at a time when that was still rare on cable television. Her fashion sense was sharp and deliberate. She genuinely loved history and vintage objects, not just as products to flip, but as physical stories. Her personal website talked about wanting to show both sides of history so that people could take ownership of it. That is not something a person says when they are just doing a job for a paycheck. The funny thing is that Danielle Colby almost was not part of American Pickers at all. When Mike Wolfe first pitched the show, History Channel executives reportedly wanted the focus locked on just 2 people, Mike and Frank Fritz. The idea was simple in their eyes: a road trip treasure hunt built around 2 pickers searching barns and garages across America. Adding a third major personality was never part of the original blueprint. So the idea of including Danielle was not immediately embraced. Mike and Frank pushed back. Both believed Danielle brought something essential to the format that could not easily be replaced. The role went far beyond answering phones or managing antique archaeology. There was a distinct energy, a sharp perspective, and a balancing presence that helped shape the chemistry of the show. Even so, enthusiasm from the network side was not immediate. According to long-circulated accounts, the invitation itself was met with disbelief at first. Reality television was still unpredictable at the time, and there was no guarantee that audiences would connect with a concept built around antique hunting. The idea felt risky, even fragile. Eventually, however, the decision was made to move forward, and that decision would change the trajectory of the show entirely. For millions of viewers, American Pickers would not feel complete without Danielle. Still, from the beginning, there was always a clear separation between the show and personal identity. Interests, passions, and ambitions existed outside the cameras, and that distinction would become important as time went on. While the series was growing into one of cable television's biggest hits, changes were already forming beneath the surface. At its peak, the show became a cultural phenomenon. Viewers were drawn to the thrill of forgotten treasures being pulled from dusty barns, packed garages, and hidden collections scattered across the country. The chemistry between Mike Wolfe, Frank Fritz, and Danielle Colby became a major reason audiences returned week after week. But success in television rarely remains static, and around season 10, subtle signs of strain began to appear. Nothing collapsed overnight. Ratings did not suddenly fall, and audiences did not disappear. Instead, the shift resembled slow deterioration, like paint peeling away from old wood. Small cracks formed first, barely noticeable at a glance, and then gradually expanded into something more visible over time. One of the most significant pressures involved Frank Fritz. Frank had been living with Crohn's disease for years, a chronic condition affecting the digestive system. The diagnosis became public back in 2013 and brought with it ongoing health challenges that were often invisible to viewers. Despite these struggles, work continued for years, though tension behind the scenes slowly became more pronounced. Over time, the relationship between Frank and Mike deteriorated in ways that were not fully visible on screen. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted production across the entire entertainment industry. Filming slowed, schedules became irregular, and reruns filled large portions of the broadcast cycle. The pause created space for underlying issues to surface more clearly, and when production resumed, the tone of the show had already begun to shift. In 2021, confirmation arrived that Frank would not return to the series. Season 22 premiered without one of its original core members, marking a major turning point. Mike publicly wished Frank well, but Frank later stated in interviews that their friendship had been breaking down for years prior to the split. The situation became public, emotional, and uncomfortable for longtime viewers. Throughout all of this, Danielle remained in a complicated position. No public conflict was initiated, and no sides were aggressively taken. Silence dominated much of the period, followed later by measured comments that expressed support for Mike, while also acknowledging sadness over Frank's departure. The situation itself was not created by Danielle, but it was impossible to remain untouched by it. Meanwhile, another shift was happening inside the show itself. The role Danielle played evolved gradually over time, moving from behind-the-scenes management toward more visible participation in picking trips. Early seasons focused heavily on antique archaeology operations and lead generation, but later seasons required more travel and on-screen involvement. As the show expanded, so did the responsibilities attached to it. Fame also changed the entire environment. In the early days, visits to small towns could still produce genuine surprise and discovery. Over time, recognition increased, and spontaneity became harder to preserve. Crowds formed quickly, locations were no longer anonymous, and the once private nature of picking began to fade under public attention. The show was still successful, but it was no longer the same experience it once had been. Outside the series, life was shifting in ways that would later prove far more significant than television changes. In 2022, a painful medical condition involving uterine fibroid growths was publicly revealed. The condition caused severe discomfort and eventually led doctors to recommend a hysterectomy. Surgery followed, and filming was paused during recovery, leading to speculation among fans about a possible permanent exit. A return eventually came in season 24 after recovery, but the experience had already left a mark. Health challenges have a way of reshaping how time is understood. What once felt flexible becomes limited, and what once felt optional begins to feel more urgent. That shift does not happen suddenly, but it becomes difficult to ignore once it starts. By late 2023, another major medical issue emerged. A tumor was removed from the face, and a diagnosis of severe trigeminal neuralgia followed. The condition is known for causing intense nerve pain across one side of the body, affecting the face, jaw, ear, neck, arm, and hand. Public descriptions of the experience reflected a period of significant pain, fear, and exhaustion. Two major medical events within less than 2 years created a pattern that was hard to dismiss. Each required recovery, each disrupted work, and each forced a pause in routine life. Over time, those interruptions began to reshape perspective in a quiet but persistent way. 14 years had been dedicated to American pickers, with constant filming, travel, and involvement in building one of cable television's most recognizable brands. At the same time, other passions had remained in the background. Creative work, burlesque performance, artistic direction, and independent projects had all been competing with the demands of production schedules for years. A wedding, a fresh start, and a sinking ship. February 2024 became one of the most important months in Danielle Colby's life. After nearly a decade together, a relationship with photographer Jeremy Schuch reached a major milestone. The couple had been dating since 2014 and became engaged in 2020 after a memorable proposal during a burlesque performance. 4 years later, the wedding finally took place in Kansas City, Missouri. At first glance, the marriage looked like a personal celebration and nothing more. But another major change happened during that same month. Danielle confirmed a departure from American Pickers, ending a television journey that had lasted more than a decade. The timing immediately caught the attention of longtime viewers. A wedding often marks the beginning of a new chapter. After years of health struggles, career demands, and personal challenges, life was clearly moving in a different direction. Spending 14 years in the same role can make anyone stop and think about what comes next. For Danielle, that moment of reflection seemed to arrive all at once. By that point, American Pickers was already very different from the show that first captured audiences. The departure of Frank Fritz had changed the chemistry that many fans loved. For years, the connection between Mike Wolfe, Frank Fritz, and Danielle Colby had been one of the show's biggest strengths. Without one of those key figures, the series naturally felt different. Around the time of the departure, fans began paying closer attention to social media posts. Every image and message suddenly seemed important. Viewers were searching for clues, hoping to understand what was happening behind the scenes. Some posts quickly became the subject of online discussions. One Instagram story created especially strong reactions. The image showed a sinking ship. Almost immediately, fans started wondering if the post was referring to American Pickers. No explanation was offered, and no public denial followed. That silence only fueled more speculation. Other posts appeared to carry a similar message. One meme suggested that having different priorities does not mean missing out on life. Another focused on appreciating opportunities and choosing what truly matters. Individually, those messages could have meant anything. Together, however, they seemed to point toward a significant change in perspective. What stood out most was the complete lack of drama. There were no angry interviews, no explosive social media rants, and no public accusations. Instead, everything suggested a slow and thoughtful transition. The signs pointed toward someone who had been considering a major life change for quite some time. Rather than walking away from something, Danielle appeared to be moving toward something new. That distinction is important because the story is often presented as a departure. In reality, the bigger story may be what came next. New goals were beginning to take center stage. One of those goals involved a return to burlesque. Long before television fame arrived, burlesque had already been a major creative passion. As American Pickers grew, that passion gradually moved into the background. Years of filming schedules and production commitments left less room for personal artistic projects. Now, that creative world was becoming a priority again. But the focus was not limited to performing. A new business venture was launched to celebrate and preserve the history of burlesque as an art form. The project represented more than entertainment. It reflected a desire to protect a culture and history that often goes overlooked. When discussing the project in 2025, Danielle described the effort as something that required enormous sacrifices. At the same time, gratitude for the opportunity was clear. Those comments revealed just how important the work had become. The strongest passions are often the ones worth fighting for. Another major project was developing alongside those efforts. Road Dog Diaries, a podcast hosted through Patreon, created a direct connection with supporters. Instead of relying on television networks, producers, or programming schedules, the platform allowed conversations to happen on entirely different terms. That independence marked a major shift. For years, public identity had been closely connected to American Pickers. New projects were now creating an identity that existed beyond a single television series. More importantly, those projects provided greater creative freedom. An OnlyFans account also attracted media attention. Many headlines focused on the platform itself, but the more interesting story was what the decision represented. Combined with the podcast, business ventures, and stage performances, the move reflected a larger effort to build an independent career. The common theme running through all these projects was control. No television network was deciding what could be created. No production schedule was setting priorities. The ability to choose projects, timelines, and goals represented a completely different way of working. Even with those exciting developments, life continued to present challenges. In December 2024, all scheduled burlesque performances had to be canceled. This time, the issue was not personal health. Serious health concerns within the family required immediate attention. The decision was difficult because so much work had gone into returning to the stage. Public statements described the situation as heartbreaking. Even so, family came first. Travel and performances became secondary concerns, while loved ones needed support. Several months later, better news finally arrived. In April 2025, a return to the stage was announced. The update included a reflection on a costume that had last been worn during an especially painful and frightening period. Those memories were difficult, but they no longer carried the same weight. The message focused on survival and growth rather than fear. Looking back was no longer about hardship alone. It was also about overcoming those hardships and moving forward with greater confidence. That outlook revealed just how much had changed. Those are not the words of someone reaching the end of a story. They sound much more like the beginning of a completely new one. What this means for American Pickers going forward. American Pickers has now lost 2 of its 3 original personalities. Frank Fritz left in 2021 after a deteriorating relationship with Mike Wolf became impossible to paper over. He suffered a major stroke in 2022. He passed away in October 2024 at the age of 60. His death hit fans hard because it made the loss of the original show permanent in a way that departure alone never quite does. Danielle officially stepped back in early 2024. Season 26, which premiered in late 2024, did not feature her. Mike Wolf remains the constant. New pickers have been introduced. The show is currently in Season 27 on the History Channel. Can American Pickers survive without the trio that made it famous? That is the question no one at the network wants to have to answer out loud. The honest version of the answer is maybe. The show was always built around the concept of picking as much as it was built around specific personalities. Mike Wolf is genuinely good at what he does. New cast members can introduce new energy, but the chemistry between Mike, Frank, and Danielle was not manufactured. Those 3 people knew each other before the cameras ever arrived. That kind of history does not get replaced by a casting call. What American Pickers is becoming right now is a different show wearing the same name. That is not automatically a failure, but it is a genuine transition, and the audience is going to have to decide whether the new version earns the same loyalty the original did. Danielle Colby was never just a supporting cast member. She was the cultural translator of that show. Mike and Frank were the hunters. They drove the trucks, made the deals, and carried the physical action of the show. But Danielle was the person who connected what they found to why it mattered. Her background in history, her genuine interest in the stories behind objects, her understanding of craft and art forms like burlesque that live at the intersection of history and performance, all of that gave the show a layer of meaning that pure treasure hunting alone could not provide. When she talked about antiques on camera, it never sounded like a sales pitch. It sounded like someone who actually cared whether the story behind an object survived. That is rarer than it seems. The Burlesque Museum project she is building now is the clearest window into what was always driving her. Burlesque is a misunderstood art form. It gets flattened into something simple when it is actually a rich tradition with roots in theatrical performance, political satire, and female self-expression going back well over a century. Danielle wants to preserve that history the same way she wanted to preserve the history of every object Mike ever pulled out of a barn. The format changed. The impulse is exactly the same. That continuity between what Danielle was doing on American Pickers and what she is building now is not a coincidence. It is who she has always been. Danielle Colby did not leave American Pickers because of drama or a falling out. She left because 14 years of health battles, personal growth, and building a new life created a version of herself that no longer fit inside that role. The show gave her a platform. What she built on top of it is entirely her own. If this video opened up the story in a new way, hit that like button and subscribe for more.